Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It was a quiet weekend in Owings Mills, but that was only after Friday morning when all of the coaches, all of the scouts, all of the personnel people in Indianapolis for the NFL Combine, and Alex Collins in a ditch with a jar of weed, in jail, and then released all before sundown on Friday. Hey, Saturday and Sunday were quiet around here, Luke.
Yeah. It was good that Saturday and Sunday, at least as far as we know, right? As long as nothing else circulates later in the week. But definitely disappointing news for Alex Collins as it relates certainly to his Ravens career now being over, and now what's next for him. As you mentioned, he was driving around on a snowy night not far from the Ravens facility with a passenger and crashes into a tree, apparently falls asleep waiting for a tow truck, and once police, which someone saw a car that had driven into a tree, police arrive, and lo and behold, they find, 5 ounces of weed.
How stoned do you have to be to run your car off a ditch into a hill and then wait for the cops to sleep with a couple ounces of weed? I'm blown away by all of it, quite frankly. But, Alex Collins was a relatively sort of quiet around the corner, didn't come out. Nobody knew him really well. He was only here a little while. I don't know anything about Alex Collins other than he danced a nice Irish jig, and he had a soft, easy way about him when I spoke to him. But he was not the most visible candidate around. I don't know that many people like us really know Alex Collins much to say, I wonder what he was doing on Friday morning at 9 o'clock, huh?
No, well, it just comes down to the fact that he didn't make himself available all that frequently to speak to the media. So, in that regard, I can't judge his character one way or the other.
No, I'm just saying we don't know anything about him. People have asked me, what did you know about Alex Collins? I'm like, he was here a very short period of time. He ran the ball really hard for a little period of time. And then, clearly, when the offense changed and the injuries came, as a football player, this wasn't all that tough a decision for them on Friday after what happened on Friday morning. This isn't some massive loss to the organization, I guess. It's not Ray Rice from a football standpoint.
No, and I think you just said it. There was some doubt whether he was going to be tendered a contract anyway, just because it really wasn't a good fit with with the changes that they made midway through the season. Now, I'll say a couple things about that. He had a really good year in 2017.
Sure.
He was a godsend for this running game that, let's face it, was kind of counting on guys like Terrence West and Buck Allen, and Kenneth Dixon had gotten hurt in the summer of 2017.
God, you said Terrence West, didn't you? Wow.
Yeah. That's kind of where this running game was. So Alex Collins came in and was a huge boost for their running game at a time when they really needed it. Keep in mind, this was when Joe Flacco was still being bothered by the back big time in the first half of that season, and he was a feel-good story, but the story wasn't as good in 2018. He had the foot issue. I think privately there was some frustration that a little bit too much dancing, no pun intended, not river dancing, but just not running with being assertive enough in how he was running, not making decisions to really hit the hole in the way that I think the coaching staff would have really liked, coupled with the fact that the run blocking wasn't as good. And then by the time that Lamar Jackson took over for the injured Joe Flacco and they revamped everything, it was all over for Alex Collins in the sense that he wasn't healthy. Gus Edwards was a better fit. Kenneth Dixon's return was right around the same time that they put Collins on IR. In fact, I can't recall off the top of my head. That might have been a one-for-one move there. I might be wrong on that, but it was right around the same time that Dixon returned that Collins went to IR. So he was a restricted free agent. Could he have gotten a low tender? Sure. Do I think that was a given that it was going to happen? No, I don't. So when you're caught with a substantial amount of marijuana and you have a handgun in your car, and whether it's you or your passenger who owns those things, it makes it very easy for the organization to move on from you. So in that regard, not a lot of drama as far as the Ravens deciding to move on. The drama is going to be what's next for Alex Collins in his life and in his NFL career coming off of a disappointing season.
Not a good look for the Ravens, right? I mean,
No.
John and everybody away, and the one thing you don't want to have happen is an arrest on a Friday morning of one of your players. Just by the by, the off seasons have been a little more quiet on the backside of Ray Rice. I mean, Jimmy Smith had an episode at the Green Turtle, but you could sort of count on a hand incidents and things like that are happening in the off season where Cincinnati would have one a week for a number of years ago. And the Ravens with the quick trigger to say you're gone. I mean, there used to be a point where the organization would say, well, we'll wait for the legal and the other side of that. I don't know. The Ravens aren't in that position anymore, and I think that runs from Steve down. You have a problem, you're just gone. I mean, I think they have a half-empty stadium, and I just got my PSL invoice over the weekend, and I'm questioning whether I'm going to renew my PSLs or not.
Well, it comes down to who the player is. If this had been Lamar Jackson, hypothetically speaking, God forbid it were your franchise quarterback in this position, they wouldn't have released him on Friday. It would have played out differently.
Yeah, so he just would have had a lot of splaining to do, right?
Sure. If this had been, Lamar Jackson, Eric Weddle's a bad example because he might be cut anyway, but if this is a veteran player who's well established as an important player, if this were a younger player who was much more important and critical to their future, then it's different. Marlon Humphrey wouldn't have been cut, but Alex Collins, he's expendable, right? And if this had been last off season, maybe it would have been different with him at this point a year ago being their number one running back. But I think in general, yes, there's a shorter leash as it relates to letting the legal process play out. Last year Marlon Humphrey got arrested, the cell phone charger in Alabama. It was a bad look, but I think anyone who really heard what happened, it wasn't the biggest deal in the world. It was more so a case of,
I saw him and Tony Jefferson and Eric Weddle having fun on Twitter over the weekend about maybe he got arrested for having stealing a cell phone. They're joke about it on social media at this point.
Yeah, and that speaks to what that was with Humphrey. That wasn't a big deal. It was embarrassing, sure, but in this case, when you're talking about someone with a handgun, when you're talking about someone with a sizable amount of marijuana, regardless of anyone's personal feelings on marijuana, we know how the NFL feels about it, and it's very clear how the NFL feels about it. So in that regard, this wasn't going to be something where the organization was just going to look the other way and just wait and see how it plays out. I think what was interesting about this, though, Nestor, and this detail came out a little bit later in the weekend, but the man that was arrested with Alex Collins, his passenger who allegedly walked home. I guess his home wasn't too far from the crash location, but they were there for a couple hours after crashing into a tree. But the individual that was with Alex Collins, and I believe the name is Tykeem Dunaway, he was with Tim Williams when he was arrested at Alabama in 2016. That, to me, is a major red flag for the organization, that this is someone that has been arrested with a player of theirs when he was at the University of Alabama in 2016, and now with a different player in Owings Mills in 2019. That's something that would concern me about, if I'm the organization, more so than losing Alex Collins here. So I thought that was an interesting detail that came out. I first caught wind of that on Saturday night, that the individual that was with Alex Collins was arrested with Tim Williams back in 2016. So, you can kind of connect the dots, potentially draw your own conclusions there as far as, is this someone supplying marijuana? Is he supplying it to potentially the Ravens players? I don't know. I just know that's something that's awfully fishy, 3 years apart and, a sizable distance apart, someone that's been connected to two Ravens players in a not-so-positive light.
And they didn't play football this weekend. And John Harbaugh is speaking on Monday night to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And we're now getting to the point where players are showing up. I'm seeing them taking pictures with people. The building's about to open. The league's about to open. Eric DaCosta is a busy guy running around Indianapolis and the Underwear Olympics. We skipped Indy this year. I don't feel like I missed anything. I got a lot of work done on Baltimore Positive over the weekend as well as WNST. And watching the Combine and watching Mike Mayock run around as a Raider and Dan Jeremiah stealing the show and all that stuff, it's not for everyone. But certainly a really important week in Indianapolis for the Ravens and for their eyes being open and for where they are with C.J. Mosley. By the way, we didn't mention the C.J. Mosley snow video. We want to get to that? It was a hell of a weekend, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. I mean, it wasn't a good look, and he even acknowledged after the fact on his Instagram that he apologized for the language that he used. I think it's fairly clear, fairly obvious he was inebriated for a video released in the middle of the night. But that said, his overall message was,
I want to stay.
I'm in Baltimore when it's snowing instead of being somewhere warm when I don't have to be at the facility. This should show that I'm committed to being here. And
I like C.J. Mosley, and I know you do too. So the whole thing was a little bit bizarre, and I was a little embarrassed for him, quite frankly. And I knew when he sobered up, he'd be embarrassed.
That said, I don't think this has a major impact.
It's not Antonio Brown, right? I mean, you know, right.
Yeah, if there was a
who also didn't have a good weekend, by the way.
right. If this is a pattern of repeated behavior of putting out videos on Instagram and doing some questionable things, then we could talk about it a little bit more. I don't.
C.J. Mosley's Instagram career is over with, no matter what.
Yeah, I don't think this has a major impact one way or the other in that regard. If the Ravens are going to get a deal done, I don't think the early Friday morning video changes that. And if they aren't going to get a deal done, I don't think it changes it in a way that they're more desperate to get a deal done. So I think it was a little embarrassing, not the best look. But again, the overall message that he delivered, would have liked to had seen it be a little more filtered from a language
Well, it was
standpoint.
Don't franchise me, right? Like don't franchise me, you know, like.
Oh, he was basically saying don't sign me, don't franchise me, and see what happens. Basically, he was saying if you let me go, see what happens. You're going to miss me. That was his overall message, and he was conveying that he wants to be in Baltimore. And look, and it wasn't the best medium.
If your drunk talk is, and we're all honest when we're drunk for the most part, right? Really honest, sometimes painfully honest, that he wants to be here, then I guess then you shrug it off and he laughs it off and you move on. I mean, no one was hurt making the video.
Exactly. There's no indication that he or anyone else that was intoxicated was driving. It looked like it was maybe Federal Hill. I don't know. I mean, so I don't think that was a big deal other than a little cringeworthy in terms of, a little embarrassing, man. Probably not the smartest idea that you've had.
I'm 6 blocks away. I would have talked him out of it. I like him enough. He would have texted me at 1:30. I would have gotten him in an Uber.
Exactly, but bygones might be bygones. It's not the end of the world. Certainly not in the same at the same level as what happened with Alex Collins, that's for sure.
All right, Luke Jones is here. He is Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute. I am getting out there this week as well. My wife's going to be working with Parisi to run a half marathon. She's on a treadmill right now somewhere. Dr. Kevin Crutchfield does concussion and head-related injuries. We're going to catch up with Dr. Craig Bennett this week, who's the orthopedic specialist. We talked to both of them about the Combine a little bit last week. You can go check it out in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault. They are the new game plan for sports-related injuries, backed by the surgeons and the doctors who treat the pro athletes. They're right in Foundry Row. They're right in Owings Mills. We have them on every week. You've seen Cal Ripken on the billboards. Let the pros take care of you. World-class care right where you are. It is LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute in Owings Mills. Also brought to you by our friends at Curio Wellness Spa. Holistic medicine and cannabis education. They're on York Road, just south of Timonium Road. Make sure you stop and see them on the west side there. Brian Sanderoff will be with us this week having a Raven discussion, amongst other things. Also, our friends at Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Always brewing the fresh coffee. I'm going to admit one more time that I have not had a Western Fry in 2019, and it's not because I'm trying to lose weight. I got to change that. I've been gassing up in the morning, so the fries aren't out, the fried chicken's not out. I tend to be like a 6:30, 7 o'clock fried chicken Western Fry guy. So Royal Farms, make sure you're using the ROFO rewards card as well and the app. When you do that, you get your fried chicken and your Western fries for free. One more shout out to our great sponsors here. I had Keith Miller on from Strategic Factory. They're in Owings Mills as well. They do hats like this. They actually did this Curio shirt. They're actually partners as well. Strategic Factory does a lot of stuff. Cups like this, hats like this, shirts like this. And more than that, the strategy that backs it up. Keith's out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. It was great to have him on from South Africa. What a great story, coming over to America 20 years ago. And Strategic Factory, employing a lot of folks here, including some friends of ours. Great partner of ours. If you need some stuff done promotionally, you need Strategic Factory. If you need Combine reports or Ravens Inside information, Luke Jones is the guy to do that. If you're on our WNST tech service, you know it is first, it is fast. We're now getting to the point, Luke, where Coons Florida Security Boulevard and Dennis, I know he'll be here on Thursday, we're going to be sending some text out because there's going to be some movement here for the Ravens. March is a movement month in a lot of ways. We talked about C.J. Mosley and the drunk Instagram video in the snow and all of that, but a lot of moving parts, but CJ's probably the first part of all of this as to what direction they're going to be going between now and 7 weeks from now when they're going to draft football players.
Yeah, I could say maybe a resolution with Eric Weddle or Jimmy Smith or both of them in terms of potentially being released.
It's a lot of money. Yeah, right?
Yeah, in terms of potential pay cuts, in terms of restructuring, in terms of potentially a short-term extension. I think there are still some options there, and I think Eric DaCosta, when asked specifically about those two individuals, he was pretty noncommittal when he spoke to the media on Wednesday. He acknowledged that he was going to have conversations with their agents, and I think in the case of those two players, and as it relates to C.J. Mosley, how drastic are you going to be in terms of potentially losing some football players? And I'll even throw Terrell Suggs into that mix with some reports about the Ravens offering him a contract. Is it a contract that, frankly, he's going to feel respected enough? I think that's a delicate.
But is it a contract he can take to Arizona or elsewhere or to the Chargers or to whomever, wherever he wants to go be out in California and say, okay, I'm going to go play for the Rams and these guys and go try to win a championship for 1 year at the end because they're going to pay me $800,000 more. I don't know. I mean, dude's got a lot of money, right? So I would think it would be about lifestyle for him, but it is, it's a 5-month move to go end your career somewhere else if you choose to do so. And for Suggs, he's a guy all about respect, all that nonsense. So, if it's about $1 million one way or another, I mean, Ed Reed leftover money, right? I mean, but the Ravens thought he couldn't play. I don't think the Ravens don't want Suggs back, and the contract would be indicative of that. They want him back, unlike Michael Crabtree, who they didn't want back, right? So, but I think they want Suggs back. But he's an interesting case as to whether he feels like he wants to be purple forever or whether he wants to go make another $1 million somewhere else, because the Ravens may give him an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this so interesting in the sense that I think they absolutely do want him back. I mean, Eric DaCosta said that, but it's got to be with the understanding of what Terrell Suggs is here in 2019, entering year 17 of a brilliant NFL career. You can't pay him for what he's already done. But at the same time, there's a delicate balance of not wanting to disrespect him in that regard. So, as you mentioned, I think a lot of people will draw some comparisons to Ed Reed and the fact that the Ravens had some interest in bringing him back, but not nearly to the point what the Houston Texans, the offer that they made him, and ultimately he signed and was a disastrous deal for them. He didn't even finish the season with the Texans, if you recall. He wound up with Rex Ryan and the Jets to finish out the final year of his career. But I think with Suggs, you have to be realistic in knowing what he is at this point. Probably better suited to become a little more of a situational player, even though he's still pretty darn good against the run. But I think you saw last year, first half of the season, looked like he was on track to have another double-digit sack campaign, and second half of the season, not so much. Really saw his play fade down the stretch. So how much of that is age? How much of that is managing the workload a little more efficiently? How much of that is potentially saying maybe he's maybe he doesn't have too much left. I think that's what's going to be really interesting about this. And again, knowing some of the veteran leadership that you have on this team, specifically on this defense, understanding where each of them is, whether you're talking about a Mosley heading the free agency, whether you're talking about Eric Weddle's cap number, whether you're talking about Terrell Suggs heading the free agency, I think there's certainly a fine line here. Even if you decide you want to be a little bit more bold and revamp your defense a little bit more, revamp your roster a little bit more, I think there is some concern not to lose too much veteran leadership too soon, and then you leave yourself in a position where, okay, it sounds great that you're going to count on a bunch of younger guys, but how much is too much in terms of the leadership that you're going to lose and how that might impact your defense? So that's where I think Eric DeCosta has a really tricky position here to try to figure this all out. I mean, can you lose two of Mosley, Suggs, Weddle, and be okay from a leadership standpoint? Now, we can debate how that affects their defense from a playing standpoint. I think you can make that argument, but can you lose all three of those guys? I think that's a tough sell to not think that there's going to be some significant growing pains on the defense if you lose all three of them. So how do you massage that? How do you figure that out? Ideally, you'd love to keep all three, but I think understanding the needs that they have, some of the free agents that they have, some of the positions that they'd like to upgrade, I think it's going to be tough to do that. But in the case of Terrell Suggs, it is a little bit different than a Weddle or, frankly, even a C.J. Mosley, because you are talking about someone who, other than Ray Lewis, other than Ed Reed, who they did let go, Jonathan Ogden, I mean, he's in that really unique territory as far as someone who has meant so much to this organization simply by being there for, coming close to 2 decades now.
Luke can be found, Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. And then there were the underwear Olympics that we skipped. I was a little lonely watching Tanier and, a bunch of friends of ours, walking around Indianapolis and underwear Olympicing and Teron Davenport. So I know all the guys that were there. I'm going to call all them this week and say, hey, what did I miss in Indianapolis last week? Well, you missed the underwear Olympics. I caught enough of the weekend on NFL Network to realize, that this is an interesting batch of football players, and I think this is the time where we get comfortable with all the new head coaches, all the new personnel people, and more than that, the moving bodies that Joe Flacco is going to be in Denver this year, Lamar Jackson's going to be here, and what are the needs of certain offenses, and how is Nick Foles going to get to Jacksonville, and all of those moving parts happen. But it is really the start of the season. I guess when you start talking 0-0 for everyone, this is the beginning of all of that, because the next 2 weeks, a lot of bodies are going to be moving around in a lot of ways. Everybody has their own version of Suggs and Weddle and Flacco and Crabtree that they need to sort out.
Sure. I mean, we're a week away from free agency at this point. I mean, at this time next week, teams will be talking and deals will be consummated, even if they can't officially be completed. That's all going to happen. I mean, you just mentioned it. There's already reports that Nick Foles to Jacksonville is that's a foregone conclusion. Now, we'll see about that, but it sure seems that there's a lot of smoke suggesting that. So, but this is the Combine. As much as we focus on seeing what DK Metcalf did or Montez Sweat or Devin White, guys with impressive 40 times and D linemen running the great 40s, linebackers doing that kind of stuff. It's fun to see that kind of stuff. But it's really what you don't see behind, in back alleys and late night bar scenes and things like that, where executives are meeting with agents and trying to figure all this out. And
have your people meet my people in our suite, right?
Yeah, and they speak in these hypothetical terms that aren't really all that hypothetical, just to kind of cover themselves. But we know that this is
no one would want to tamper, right? Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, this is, no one's even pretending at this point because we are so close to free agency. I mean, we'll see it. There'll be some deals that we know that will become official next Wednesday that are pretty much already official. I mean, that's just the truth. I mean, if you follow, I know you're a big fan of guys like Andrew Brandt who really pull back the onion, so to speak, to really show you how the business is done. there are deals that were completed this week in Indianapolis. I mean, that's just the reality. It's just no one knows it just yet.
Well, the fact that the Joe Flacco thing, got out a couple weeks ago and they wanted it out, that's all part of this too, right? To figure out who's going to be in what boat and figuring out what your competitors are doing. I mean, the Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell thing's fascinating unto itself, and we're not even in Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, we mentioned Le'Veon Bell. I mean, even if the Ravens are denying it, there was all kinds of smoke from Indianapolis that the Ravens are one of the teams that are, I think most people are connecting the dots thinking it's the best fit from a standpoint of, okay, here's this high-priced running back who wants to be the highest-paid running back in the NFL or at least wants to make up some of the money that he lost last year. And, well, you have the Ravens who run the ball more than anyone, or at least they did over the second half of the season last year. So I'd rather
have Le'Veon Bell running into linebackers 24 times a game than my quarterback doing it, and my quarterback doing it 8 instead of 15. How about that?
Well, sure, but at what cost? Considering you just had a rookie free agent who did it at a really high level for you, do you need to make that lucrative of an investment at the running back position when you had a rookie free agent do what he did in Greg Roman?
Dude, I don't know much about Le'Veon Bell, but he's not a great decision maker.
Well,
that's all I'm going to say. I mean, I watched what happened last year financially for him. Everybody in Pittsburgh did. Everybody in the NFL did. I can only question his intelligence so far, and I'm not being mean. I'm just being like, you're the only guy in the world that ever turned down $14 million in the prime of your career. If it's conscientious objection and it's, I don't want to get my head hit or, I don't like football anymore or I found God or whatever it is, that's fine. But, I mean, his whole thing was a financial play. It's going to go down as the dumbest thing that's ever been done.
It's up there because I'm guessing he's not going to get nearly as much as he thinks he's going to get. I mean, there was a report, the one team more so than the Ravens even that a lot of people have speculated about is the Jets, and there was a report over the weekend that they're going to be looking at more second-tier options like a Tevin Coleman or an Ingram, someone like that, rather than Bell. And it's funny, you mentioned even the principal talking about, well, maybe he just didn't want to bang his head, didn't want to get hurt, doesn't love football as much. Well, those are going to be problems to potential suitors. That's not something that executives are going to want to hear, even if that were the case. So it's going to be really fascinating in that regard for him. And you mentioned Antonio Brown. I've become more convinced day by day with all of these interviews and these comments he's making. It sounds like he's trying to absolutely sabotage his trade value to the point where the Steelers are going to have to release him. I don't know. I've said all along, and I'm not alone in this. I've been skeptical that there truly will be a divorce. I guess at this point it's just getting his comments are so bizarre, so bitter towards the organization.
Well, he's got this roster bonus coming up, too, that they're going to have to give him a couple $1 million. And
And it seems as though he, as much as he met with Rooney, and there appeared to be, at least for a minute, that there was some amount of cooperation involved, that, okay, you're going to chill out, and we're going to shop you and get the best offer we can. That lasted a couple days, it seemed, at most. And since then, it's been the gloves are off again. And again, some of the things that he's saying. I mean, he said over the weekend in one interview that I don't really need this. I don't even need to play football, blah, blah, blah. And again, 31 other teams are hearing this and saying, oh, yeah, this sounds like a guy that I want to sign up, eagerly want to sign up to have and to put into my locker room and think that it's going to be fine and harmonious. I mean, he's a tremendous player. And I mean, he is a Hall of Fame caliber player, has been for the last 5 years at least. But at some point in time, you continue to look at this and you just say, boy, the more and more he talks, the more that comes out of his mouth, you ask yourself more and more, is the juice really worth the squeeze here? He is a great player, but if things fell apart this badly in Pittsburgh for him, what's not to say the same thing's not going to happen for us in the next year or two? So I'm guessing they'll find a suitor because he is such a great player, and we've talked about how many different guys over the years that were problematic, Terrell Owens and Randy Moss at times, and go down the list of so many different individuals. Whether the perception was fair or not, teams generally would end up taking a chance. Another team would take a chance, and when you look at his production, you can understand. But boy, he's not making anything easy on the Steelers in terms of trying to find a suitor with him continuing to open his mouth and just say bizarre things and things that are really make him not necessarily come across in the most positive light, even though he's trying to point the finger at everyone else. And look, the truth's somewhere in the middle there in Pittsburgh as far as Tomlin and Roethlisberger and guys not being able to say kumbaya or not. Probably. But he's not doing anything to help his situation, that's for sure.
He even pooped on poor Ben Roethlisberger on his birthday over the weekend. I put a picture up. Luke can be found, Luke at WNST.net. Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. And, of course, together we're out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day. We're around all week. You can email me anytime, nasty at WNST.net. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Celebrating my dad's 100th birthday here this week. March 5th was his birthday. We'll be telling some stories here later in the week. I'm also going to be sharing some stuff out on social media all week for those of you who knew my dad, some old school people who remember the show that I used to have every March 5th for my dad. So it is a big week around here. Toss me a note. We're going to be here all week doing Orioles, Ravens, certainly some Terps as we get ready for March Madness, and more as we prepare for our Baltimore Positive launch next month as well. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.